Yeah, so this is really where you get the opportunity to choose whether you want to be like Neo in the Matrix or part of the Matrix or part of Zion fighting the Matrix all day long.
Mm.
So what Neo represents in the film trilogy is what happens when our frontal lobes grow out and we start separating and we see that, oh, what we have identified with a map in our head of how reality is just one of an infinite choice of maps. In the popular culture and movies, that's called the multiverse. Right? See it in Spider-Man and a bunch of other movies, right? Multiverse, multiverse, multiverse. So you separate consciousness, you have an independent observer, you start becoming aware of different mental maps that you can have. And like clothes, if you get really comfortable with this, you can start trying on different clothes. And this, in fact, is the fundamental kind of driving force unconsciously of things like the whole LGBT movement. And it's not so much that it's important or needed that you change your sexuality or your clothes or anything like that. It's that you separate from a stuck, fixed identity that is so limiting to the spirit. So it's almost a spiritual impulse, completely misinterpreted by the brain, which is, bless its heart, it's doing its best.
Papaya! Hello all, and welcome to another episode of Transform Your Future with me, Eddie Isin, where I sit down with entrepreneurs, thought leaders, and high achievers as they identify areas I can improve on and guide me to further my self-improvement practice. For more information and insights, join the newsletter at transformyourfuture.com, where I write about reinvention, personal growth, and identity. We want to hear from you. Let us know how we can improve your listening experience. Please reach out to us through our website, your podcast app, comment, or just text me directly at 813-722-1417. In this episode, titled Authenticity in an Artificial World, Your Path to True Identity, my guest is Christopher Zdenek, aka The Anomaly. Christopher is a leading expert on paradigms, consciousness, human development, and performance optimization through biofeedback and ergonomics. He has both studied consciousness and run a manufacturing company that has led its industry in innovation for over 25 years, and almost became a Benedictine monk due to a variety of spiritual experiences. He's a member of the Society for Consciousness Studies and an original member of the Society for Chaos Theory in Psychology and the Life Sciences. Christopher discovered the pattern of all human and cultural behavior in 1988 and has been studying paradigms and what creates them for over 30 years. After years of presenting in academic conferences, he sees that it is time to present this to the world. His work, The Fractal Nature of Consciousness, the Evolution of the Global Human, and the Driving Forces of History, is the basis of his forthcoming book and has been reviewed, praised, and or influenced the work of top scholars of new paradigm thinking. He combines insights from neurofeedback to developmental stage theory, chaos and fractal theory to evolutionary psychology, and much more. We had a great conversation and talked a lot about reinvention and identity, and all that through the lens of the driving forces of history, its innovation, and human behavior paradigms, what they are and what generates them. If you feel lost in a world of artificial identities, this episode guides you on a path to authenticity, helping you find and embrace your true self amidst societal chaos. Join us as we delve into the challenges of struggling with identity and being overwhelmed by societal pressures. Learn powerful techniques and gain insights to stay true to yourself and thrive no matter what the world demands. Stay tuned and discover how to break free from external expectations and uncover your authentic self. Chris, welcome to Transform Your Future podcast. Thank you for spending your time with me today. And, we've been talking a lot about what you're working on. And I'm very excited to talk about boxes and which one we're stuck in and how to get out of it. Let's talk about your work on that.
Sure. I'm really happy to be here. This is something I've been working on from a discovery I made back as long as 1988 is when I first made the discovery of basically what is a hidden pattern that is one of those things that's, right in front of our faces, but pretty much everyone doesn't see it or understand its impact and its influence on our lives.
Yeah. So give me a 10,000-foot view of the overarching theme of how we end up in these boxes.
Sure. So being that I was raised mostly in Silicon Valley, I'll give you what they call the elevator pitch. So the hidden pattern is the simplest thing ever. It's essentially the developmental stages that all human organisms go through from the time we're born or before that to the time we die. Depending on what expert you look at, Erikson, Piaget, and others, there are 7 to 8 stages that we all go through. And these have biological, psychological, and consciousness aspects or correlations or relationships between them all. So you could say it's an entirely physical, biologically driven pattern that therefore ends up creating different types or levels of consciousness or stages of consciousness, as well as different worldviews. So the simple part of it is these developmental stages, you're an infant. That's the first stage, right? Then you go into the 2 to 3 year old stage, then the 3 to 7 to 8 year old stage between the ages of 7 and 11. There's a really big transition. One of the things if anybody's going to get anything out of this, understand these stages and these 2 transitions. Transition number 1 is between the ages of 6 months and 3 years of age. Every single one of us imprints for the first time. It's like we lay down the first neural nets. What our assumption of the world is. In other words, answering kind of Einstein's famous question, is the world, the universe, friendly or not friendly? So in between 6 months and 3 years of age, we all get the experience of, oh, wow, this is me and this is not me. Mommy, the blanket, this teddy bear, whatever it is. We get a cognitive imprint and first sense of self. It's very defined. So if we imprint in a moment where we're happy and safe feeling, we imprint that the universe is happy and safe, and we're safe. If that realization of separateness occurs when we are stressed, scared out of our minds, or threatened feeling, we imprint on our minds the universe is unsafe and scary. So imagine what that does to the trajectory of your entire life.
Yeah. That's very interesting. So I know that when we've spoken before, you mentioned that, for example, we're in the adolescent stage when we're talking about media and what's out there and how the world is responding. So these stages that we're talking about, there's both a biological imprint that's happening, but then there's also a external action that we take based upon that at different times, like different levels.
Absolutely, 100%. I can say this 1,000 times. This affects everything that you or I or the human species has ever done or ever will do. I can't emphasize that enough. It doesn't matter if you're an Aboriginal person, Master of the Universe Wall Street guy in a $15,000 suit. It affects you every moment of every day.
Yeah. And certainly there's a lot of evidence and scientific research that shows about these development stages that we all go through and the things. How does this tie back into as we progress? Like, how does that help me to know
Sure.
this information? Now
Sure.
I'm a 50-year-old, whatever.
Sure. So another really big transition occurs between the ages of 7 and 11. Up to the age of 7 to 11, we have a worldview, a way of interacting with, seeing, interpreting the world that's primarily kinesthetic. We feel the world.
Mm-hmm.
Connected to that and happening at the same time is what most people understand as the magical worldview, where a child's mind, and you can see children all over the world,
Mm-hmm.
is magical in their thinking. They don't directly understand cause and effect and other things. That after the age of 7 and 11, that's when there's a shift in the brain and the entire physiology, the somatic experience, the somatic machine that is our body mind,
Mm-hmm.
switches from kinesthetic to primarily cognitive and visual interpretation and interaction with the world. That's when the scientific mind actually begins to take hold in an individual human being. So, one example, the Renaissance of all of Europe, right,
Mm-hmm.
is the documentation or the example of or driven by the human species in that area of the world going through that transitionary stage. They're suddenly going, and this is why we remember things, and you can kind of go through all of the main favorite popular factoids that you learn in history class. Descartes is known for saying, "I think, therefore I am."
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's just saying, oh, I don't feel, therefore I am. I now think, therefore I am. That is where I get my sense of identity, my sense of understanding of everything.
And
So go ahead.
how does that tie in? Because I'm just trying to draw the lines here.
Sure.
So, not only is it a biological, physical development stage, there's a movement that is going on, some movement that's going on, and the movements also go through these development stages. Is that how it connects?
Yeah, your show's about transformation. Essentially,
Yes.
we have the opportunity to transform all through life through these 7 stages. Now, I say we have the opportunity because it's not guaranteed. What
Mm-hmm.
many researchers have found out over the decades, we can get stuck and never get past stage 2. That's the angry baby and the 60-year-old body.
Mm.
They're highly identified with their body.
The terrible twos forever.
Yeah. And one of the things that causes that is if you had that really traumatic experience in that initial perception of separateness, and the trauma just laid down super deep grooves in the neural nets. And you are stuck in a canyon.
Wow.
And if it's early enough, you almost don't have a choice. That's when your previous guest, the hypnosis expert, was talking about, identity and our subconscious mind.
Mm-hmm.
In Silicon Valley speak, that's knowing exactly the transistors that were etched in the silicon wafer when your computer hardware was made.
Yes.
Now
Very
we're wet hardware, right?
Yeah.
So we, in recent years, have transcended the initial scientific understanding that certain things grow to a certain stage and they're fixed.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Now we've learned about neuroplasticity, for example.
Yes. I've been researching that.
Which to yogis and others for, centuries, that was like a normal understanding. But one of the aspects of adolescent thinking after 7 to 11, so essentially from ages 7, 8, 9, 11 to 25, is very concretized and what I call linear, binary, reductionistic separation logic. Now you're gonna
have to unpack that one.
Sure. that's you could say is like the firmware your computer hardware is running on.
So that develops from 11 to 25. Is that what you said?
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. Yeah, it's just going up and up and up and up. And so the United States, in my research over the decades, clearly is the representation in the human species of the adolescent stage. And one fabulously interesting, factoid from the media, the 80s, the media named the me decade or the me generation.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had the big t-shirts and slogans of it's all about me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so adolescence has that predisposition of getting very kind of ingrown toenailish because it is so overwhelmed by the perception of separateness. And you see this in all the teenagers. It's like, oh, I'm me. Who's looking at me? Do I look okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm really worried about judgment and, how I'm being seen. And the internet, social media, all of that has been increasing the pinnacle of adolescent cognitive awareness and personal experience of reality.
And how, as a society, then, how do we move to the next level of consciousness?
So biology, again, helps us. Most people don't know this. I'm an architect by training, really great education, college, university. I've read 300 books. I've gone to countless webinars, seminars, etc. Hung out with some very intelligent people. Until I was in something called the Society for Chaos Theory in Psychology and the Life Sciences in Georgetown University, where I was presenting my work to this little academic organization. I was talking to a famous neuroscientist, neurosurgeon named Carl Pribram. And that was the first time, and so that was maybe 1992. And at that point, I'm 30 years of age. That was the first time I'd heard from him telling me, oh yeah, the human brain in males doesn't finish growing out until about age 23, 25. I was like, what?
Mm-hmm.
Now that's more common knowledge.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're half-baked. So I don't care who you are, in what country, in what race, culture, etc. You are not running on all cylinders with a full functioning transmission. You're like stuck in third gear forever until that frontal lobe grows out. And researchers have found out over the years, once that happens, it actually stimulates, or happening at the same time is an interest in spirituality. And the real benefit of it and how it helps us transform is the frontal lobes are the executive function of the brain, which allows you to develop an observer watching yourself. Right? That's, in addition to the first two transitions of laying down your neural net of is the universe safe or unsafe, and I'm separate, to the transition from I'm feeling the world to I'm seeing it and thinking about it. This third transition is fundamentally huge.
Yes, it sounds like you're talking about my life as you're talking about things. It was when I was 25 that I became interested in spirituality and learning more about it and how it all fits together in the world.
Yeah, there you go. So, yeah, researchers over the decades have found that in multiple subjects of testing over and over again.
Interesting.
Yeah. So you get interesting, funny things that relate to this, or you could say, "Hey, was this what they're talking about?" So in the Bible, they have this wonderful story about the return of the prodigal son. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, where did that prodigal son go, and how did he come back, or why did he come back? Well, he went into the adolescent mind, was stuck in linear, binary, reductionistic separation logic, and eventually his frontal lobes grew out, and he could see himself, and he could see, again, the connection to all things that he has, or she has, and suddenly comes back to, in the Bible, it's, Christ, God, or the family that he ran away from, the father that he, pissed away, etc.
Yeah. So, I mean, I talk about this a lot that I practice my faith. I practice spirituality I consider myself a spiritual person, not really so much a religious person, although I practice religion.
Yeah.
But I talk a lot to individuals about, do they have some type of faith? Do they believe that there's something beyond themselves that exists, that there's some kind of force for good in the universe that they could tap into? Because I think it's vital and important.
Yeah.
And so what I'm hearing you say is absolutely it's vital and important. And absolutely this is like a level that we need to take ourselves to be understanding how we fit into everything else and how we're all connected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that, again, that first transition of the perception of separateness has a huge influence on how easily or not easily you can do that. If you were highly traumatized in that moment, the self-protection impulse is so strong that seeing ourselves as part of everything is next to impossible. You're like 100% down for the existential anxiety of, Sartre and all the existentialists, and you're the scream. You're the scream in living personification. I'm here alone in this giant universe.
You're living the myth of Sisyphus.
Yeah. Yeah. And here's the scary part about this. These could be people that run corporations and countries, world banks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And
making decisions that affect all of us. Yeah.
Right. And they don't even know that this is, and in my book, that one of the chapters when I'm introducing this, I call it the ghost in the machine. And another piece of it, you could call it serendipity or the Holy Ghost or whatever interesting force magically sort of influences the trajectory of things and the bumping into people and things like that we all experience throughout our lives.
Is there a level beyond the after 25?
Yeah, well, the biggest thing in that is integrating all of the previous stages. And this is really where the human race is at the present moment. And so that's why I kind of compare this to the fourth turning, and that book having a cycle of 4 steps, and each stage of 20-year generation has a relationship and a character to the others. And every 4, they start a new cycle. So here in this, each developmental stage, you're in the first one, the second one, the third one, the fourth one. Now, in the transition from adolescence to early maturity, we're essentially in the fourth one, or some people might say the fifth. And for the human race and for each of us individually, the unbelievably important thing for us to do is to reconnect with the previous stages. So in ourselves, that's reconnecting with the infant experience that is in our body. A recent popular book was The Body Keeps a Score.
Yeah.
That highlights how our brain is not just our brain. Our brain is our entire neural system and all of our cells in our entire body. They have all imprinted. They are all thinking. They're all connecting to and referencing that stage of development all the time. And then the next one, and the next one, and the next one. So if we're really stuck in that adolescent mind, it ain't letting go. That brain is on steroids, and a fabulous example of that was the movie series The Matrix. In fact, the metaphorical symbolism of that movie is the battle between the mind, which is called the egoic ego world. It's the mental map of reality that our brain has created that we think is reality.
Yes. Yes.
It's not the real reality that our body says, hey, dude, over here in the underground caves in Zion, we're kind of hanging on as best we can, but you're really messing things up, dude. You're trying to destroy us. And Smith, the agent, is sitting there going, this place, this smell, I hate it. I've got to get out of here. And that's what the ego mind, which is kind of like a tool for survival is stuck at. It's like, oh, I'm in this body. I'm in this scary, dangerous universe. I've got to survive, but man, I'd really like to get the heck out of here. Because it's deadly. The only way out is death. And I've got to avoid that at all costs. And take everyone with me if I have to in the process. Depending on how much trauma any of us has experienced. You can develop the psycho or sociopathological personality coping style, or that of a narcissist, malignant, charismatic, or otherwise, where, the basic rule is use anybody and everybody for your own ends. For your normal, non-traumatized person, that's like, we can't even comprehend. What do you mean use anybody and everybody for our own ends? And it doesn't matter if it hurts them or kills them. What? You're just gonna, it's so beyond, because we are genetically, biologically programmed with mirror neurons where we really connect with people and we imprint and learn from everybody automatically, and empathy. So it's like against kind of, it's like, that's like the impulse of why we save somebody that we see that, is in a tragedy that they're about to get crushed by a rock or something. We risk our own lives to save them because we empathically feel the horror of the pain that they're about to feel, and we can't let that happen, so we try to save them. But if you've been traumatized, here's the really, really, really sad, terrible thing. The receptors in the brain that accept things like oxytocin get killed. And you don't get the same feedback loop of pleasure, joy, happiness, and excitement by giving, by touching. There are women who can't be proper mothers because like a baby touching them like grosses them out. They're like, they were so traumatized that they have no oxytocin feedback loop going on. They can't get the experience of joyful bonding with the baby or a lover or anybody. So the world
I didn't know that.
I didn't either until I had some experiences with narcissistic people, women specifically, where I learned that. And I was very deeply involved with them, so I understood their childhood and the terrible tragedies and pain and, trauma that they experienced. And so I don't know if you noticed, I didn't say somebody becomes a psychopath or sociopath or narcissist. I said they take on that coping style or that personality style. It's like a survival mechanism.
So it's your indication is a non-judgmental approach to it, that this is just a pattern that exists. It doesn't mean it's necessarily you and who you are.
Right. And this is in alignment with the concept of neuroplasticity and our wet biology, that we can reinvent ourselves, transform ourselves at any moment. There's a funny story that like the Buddha was asked something like, how many people are in hell? His answer was something like, well, we don't really know, because at that last moment before the pearly gates, or whatever you want to call death, that person could change their mind and accept being one with everything and self-love and God, or whatever, sort of phrase you want to use for it.
Yeah, it's a decision.
So you don't have an identity that you're stuck with. We actually have the capacity to change and transform. It's just got, some roadblocks, or we got some chains. The great stories about, you put a cap on a glass and the fleas are in it and they're jumping to escape, and they jump and they jump and they hit the lid, but then you take the lid off a few weeks later, they'll never jump higher than where that lid was, even though the lid's no longer there.
You train them.
Our biology has that trap that we all can be susceptible to. We're creatures of habit. And that is I just started learning about this more recently, of the biological impulse and need, imperative, you could say, for metabolic efficiency. Fancy word for we don't want to waste energy. Doesn't matter if it's an amoeba or us. Biology, cells, molecules don't want to waste energy.
It's interesting. I believe in reinvention. I believe that you have the ability to change. I've changed myself many, many times. I feel like it's a lifelong process that you're, open-minded, you listen, you observe, and as you recognize things, you say, oh, that's interesting. What is that about? Why am I doing it that way? I just noticed that that's a little pattern. It's like one of the first questions I ask myself when I have any situation, any challenge that arises. I ask myself, so is this something that's happened before? Is this something that I'm familiar with? And is this a pattern? And okay, how does that pattern start? Where is that from? Quick processes to identify areas that is it something I can do about it, or is this something that I'm completely out of control about? Is this somebody else's shit? Does it come externally? But I think how can a person then, based upon the understanding of the different developmental areas and how we're always moving through that, how can a person then, what kind of questions can a person ask themselves in order to make the necessary changes to move to the next level?
Sure. So a really practical tool is something called Vipassana meditation. And that essentially is the practice of a meditation where you're building, like you're working out at the gym, building that bicep, an independent observer. So instead of closing your eyes and just relaxing and zoning out, you are starting to watch your mind stream. And as you practice watching your mind stream, like, oh, Susie wore a yellow dress. Oh, I was angry at mom. Oh, I went to school today and I really was wanting to do this. And all of those things, you start to build this observer. And as you start to build the observer, you really get to take advantage of, and you're going into flow of this developmental stage of early maturity, of separating this independent observer capacity that the frontal lobes gives us from the other operational self.
Yeah.
And that's probably the biggest tool we have from that stage to death to become human. And in my book, what I point out is this is actually the first time in human history of the species where we're going to actually be human. Up to now, we've primarily been mammals.
Yes.
Identified with our feelings and emotions.
And this is a movement that's been going on for a while. I guess I got caught up in it because I've been meditating now for 36 years. And I don't know who it was who told me. I'm not familiar with the term you use about that meditation, but I don't know where I learned this from. I've read countless books about meditation, and somewhere along the way, it talked about visualizing yourself as 10 feet above it all, looking down at yourself, observing what you're thinking, what you're doing, what you're saying, and how you're acting. And I trained myself like the fleas to do that in my life, and to keep that practice alive every day, and own my day with that in the beginning of my day, and try to watch what I'm doing and saying throughout the day.
Yeah, so this is really where you get the opportunity to choose whether you want to be like Neo in the Matrix, or part of the Matrix, or part of Zion fighting the Matrix all day long. So what Neo represents in the film trilogy is what happens when our frontal lobes grow out and we start separating, and we see that, what we have identified with a map in our head of how reality is just one of an infinite choice of maps. In the popular culture and movies, that's called the multiverse. Right? See it in Spider-Man and a bunch of other movies, right? Multiverse, multiverse, multiverse. So you separate consciousness, you have an independent observer, you start becoming aware of different mental maps that you can have. And like clothes, if you get really comfortable with this, you can start trying on different clothes. And this, in fact, is the fundamental kind of driving force unconsciously of things like the whole LGBT movement. And it's not so much that it's important or needed that you change your sexuality or your clothes or anything like that. It's that you separate from a stuck, fixed identity that is so limiting to the spirit. So it's almost a spiritual impulse, completely misinterpreted by the brain, which is, bless its heart, it's doing its best. There's a great U2 song saying the ego is like a child crossing a 7-lane highway, trying to get across.
I'm fascinated. We talked before about this, and I'm just kind of fascinated with these ideas of identity and reinvention. And for 20 years or so, maybe a little bit less, I've been working on a documentary film, because my background is in directing, writing, producing, and directing film, and I've done a lot of documentary work. And I've been working on one about identity, and really about. It's just amazing when you think about, like, for example, something I did is I had a bunch of situations happen to me all at the same time that left me not being able to walk and having serious physical disability problems.
Yeah.
And also at the same time, I gained an enormous amount of weight from being depressed and not functioning like I used to.
Yeah.
And I did everything I could to manage it myself and put in my own effort to change my life and lifestyle. But at some point, the fastest way in order to be able to walk again and live some kind of reasonable life was going to be having a gastric bypass surgery. And so this took a huge commitment, really, because you're physically changing your body for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
I haven't looked into the statistics. I imagine there may be some people who redid the surgery to put it back to normal, but I doubt it. So, that fascinated me, and I started looking at other people who went through these major commitments to change. For example, a female to male transgendered person. All of the work and effort that they have to put in to change their identity and do all that. I'm just fascinated with like the possibilities of it. Like, what is that means that anybody at any time really could, like you say, try on the new clothes, which is why I love the fact that, this is really uniquely possible for anybody at any time to really look at who you are, what you're doing, and are you really doing what you want to be doing? Can you develop to a higher self? Can you get to a better place? I think it's fantastic and fascinating.
Yeah. So one model of these developmental stages is by a company or a group of researchers. They call themselves Stages International. So their system, they do numbers: 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, 4.5, 5, 5.5, goes up to 8. So adolescent peak is 3.5. That's the first time a human being really has what's called the self-authoring capacity. In the stages of 2 and 2.5, it's a collectively oriented stage. It's very much based on your identity, is that of matching the social structure that you're raised in. At 3, 3.5, you're more individually focused, and the 3s tend to become the experts, the academics that have a PhD, that become super expert in this body of knowledge that exists. But they very seldomly break barriers and create something new. Somebody that is transitioned into 3.5 tends to do that. And they essentially kind of threaten and piss everybody else off in the previous stages. But because it's an innovative idea, eventually that it's valid and that it works, it eventually takes hold and it gets a bunch of followers, and you get like Apple Computer or Christianity or other movements throughout history, right? Where the American Revolution in the United States.
Yeah.
And on it goes. The detriment or the blind spot or shadow of the 3.5 stage is what's we know as the harsh meritocracy. Right, it's very hierarchically oriented. So after that, you get stage 4, 4.5, and those are again collectively focused. And 4 is looking at the horrors of that hierarchy, and it wants to flatten everything out. Say we're all equal. So you go to like San Francisco State, and there's a whole campus of people that are in that stage, all day long. We are all equal. Don't judge me. Who are you to judge me? You are not better than me.
Come down from your ivory tower.
Yeah, yeah. So super, super important is going to stage 4.5, where you've been doing that for a while, and eventually you go, that skill over there is a little more useful than that skill over there, and I might want to highlight that. And so the 4.5 is known as the strategist. Super important stage, and some of the most successful business people are strategists because they can put all the dots together and see exactly what's the great path. Or military leaders, for example. They've got access to the previous stages. They can improvise, be self-authoring. They don't follow, standard rules and boxes. And so that's one, possible title of my book, Boxes. Each of these stages that we've gone through are like boxes, and they entirely limit your cognitive capacity to think. I had the great experience of having breakfast next to the guy who was considered the smartest man in the world with an IQ of like 198. And we were having a conversation about Trump, for example, and why he got elected and what that's about. And it's like, suddenly I realized, oh my God, he's not aware of developmental stages. Somebody like Trump, in fact, almost had to be elected because it's completely in alignment with a binary linear logic separation brain structure. And more importantly, one that's been traumatized. And one of the things I say in my book is that the human race is currently being run by someone who is a male raised in a traumatized, authoritarian, hierarchical, adolescent social structure. And that's the value structure, the worldview that is making decisions on all the assets of the entire planet. Doesn't matter if it's iron ore, petroleum, or you and me. And that traumatized adolescent, that was traumatized in infancy and an authoritarian family structure. And you can look at some of this. There's a great group of people that study all of the cultures of the world based on the child rearing patterns that those cultures have. And what they found is that every single culture in the world is entirely the product of the child rearing pattern that they have.
Right.
So, somebody in Japan, many people don't know, it's common that kids sleep with their parents until the age of 11. Right? In adolescent America, are you kidding? No, we're separating as soon as possible. You're an infant at 6 months old, dude. You're yourself. Imagine what a different way of being that creates in an individual. And the individual, he's just taking on all this stuff, filling the jar of identity. And as the joke says, it's hard to read the label from inside the jar. Right? You got no idea what the ingredients are that are making you up and creating your identity right now. Until you've got that frontal lobe, you've developing through Vipassana meditation or other things, this independent observer that can float outside of the jar, kind of have an out-of-body experience, and start reading the ingredients in the label and going, oh, that label, that ingredient's good. That one, not so good. That one, oh yeah, I like that one. And then you can start actually doing your jar of ingredients. And so the impulse spiritually is there to become whatever you want to be. And so this is, I can't emphasize this enough. The transition between 4.5 and 5. 5 is when you're becoming Neo, you're seeing the multiverse, you're seeing all these ingredients, you're seeing all the choices. If you're currently in a unhappy place, could be a job, a marriage, sexual identity, whatever it is, the impulse is, get the hell out of this, right? Get the divorce, move the house, sell, burn the boats, everything. It's way too soon for that. The experts in this are like waving all the red flags. Don't do that. Do not change anything at this moment. You're still too unconscious of the process of what's going on, and you might, put yourself under the knife, sell your family home, get your divorce, whatever it is, and then a year or 2 or 3 later, once you started integrating all this stuff, you go, oh shit, I actually just wanted to do this. I didn't need to do all that. So anybody considering any major life transition, try to notice if you're in that place of seeing all these options and you're not happy with some of the ingredients and you want to throw out some of the ingredients of your identity, and be really careful to get a flavor of them. Do Vipassana meditation for a year on each ingredient of your identity. And then you have the wisdom to choose, this one I want. I don't want the MSG so much, for example. I don't want the red dye number 5. But I'll stick with, whatever it is.
Yes. Yes. That's very good advice. I like that. And, and I agree. Oftentimes I tell people, well, I know you want to change everything, but
Yeah.
maybe we just start by adding some new healthy habits into your life, like meditation, like maybe some exercise and fitness, like taking better care of yourself physically and emotionally and, spiritually. Yeah. Absolutely. Take your time to make these major changes, Yeah,
that's one of the reasons I think Steve Jobs at his funeral, one of his wishes was that they gave a book of Paramahansa Yogananda's autobiography of a yogi to all the attendees. Steve inherently knew and understood the value of this meditative practice and orientation to life. Steve would have never been able to do what he did, for example, if he hadn't had that impulse in himself and a respect and awareness of it. That, he went with his college roommate friend, who's a friend of mine, actually, that lives in Palo Alto, to India and was practicing these things and doing all that. But Steve's path was different, so he came back earlier to do business and make, things happen and innovate and all that. But in his mind, he understood that, and he had the freedom of mind to be able to break barriers and do things that, many can't.
Yeah.
So if you really want to get ahead in life, really want to shake things up, have a sense of really almost unlimited sense of freedom, joy, and stuff like that, get to this 5.5 developmental stage of really developed early, then you could call it late maturity. And then you're like a jazz musician that's been practicing for, 20 years doing scales, that's bored out of his mind. You can improvise. You can ad-lib. You can just rock and roll and have a great time because, you suffered through Juilliard and whatever, school of whatever it is, playing basketball or anything, doing math. And in this case, it's doing life. We're not stuck in following rules like a 2.5 person. We're not stuck being the expert that only does the one canon of law that's considered valid. We're not just reinventing things to be famous. We really have freedom and the opportunity to experience life in a more, you could just call it a spiritual way.
With deeper meaning.
Yeah, way deeper meaning. Yeah. And so the people that have been traumatized, it's just terribly sad that the culture, if we want to do something, if I was president, we would have trauma healing recovery programs all over the planet all day long. Because trauma is like a set of chains that holds us all back individually or collectively from being able to get to that place of seeing why we're choosing something, getting out of things like resentment, revenge, living in the past, just repeating the trauma over and over and over and over and over and over again. All wars, all conflicts, that's all those are. And we can come up with, the brain is so beautifully inventive. We can come up with 1,000 reasons to justify and explain why we have to attack this person or that person or that person. No, we have to heal ourselves. We have to get to, the universe is a safe, friendly place. Tony Robbins, in his transformation through his life, eventually got to a place where he repeats this regularly in his seminars. Consider that life isn't happening to you. It's happening for you. And then whatever's happening, you can look at it and go, what's the lesson from this? And in fact, the Aboriginal worldview, from Australian Aborigines, for example, for them, the reality of spirit, God is 100%. They didn't have any missionaries tell them that or anything. They're sitting in dream time because they're sitting there one with everything. And there's almost nothing more blissfully great feeling than being one with everything.
Yes.
To melt into that, it's like the stress of anything and everything is gone. And you can get into an energetic space that you can feel in your body that you're just buzzing with it. Just, God, it feels so good.
What I was thinking, interestingly enough, is I want to bring you back on. I love the work that you're doing. I want to know more. I want to follow up with you again, obviously, and I want to bring you back on when you're ready to release the book out there, so that I could participate in that with you and find out more and go a little bit deeper.
Sure, be great. Love to.
Yes. Is there anything you want to say in closing today?
Well, everybody needs to understand the misperception of separateness that drives ourselves or the world. Any trauma that any of us has had that's driving us. Understand the multiple perspectives that are possible and start picking the ones that are most useful, that get us the results that collectively benefit us all, together and individually. Practice that independent observer so you develop the muscle to be able to do that better and better, so you can unstick yourself, de-identify with that unconscious set of ingredients that you were stuck with. And you get to start picking ones that really get you joy and happiness. If we're stuck in trauma, we're stuck in that empty soul place. And it's almost the engine of capitalism. It's when capitalism took a dysfunctional turn and turned into a endless project of trauma stuffing, the empty hole of brokenness, which can never be filled, which is really behind the environmental destruction of the planet. And our sense of separateness is what's behind our capacity to destroy the world and to not see us as the environment, and that's our home, and we see them as separate things, and there's antagonism between the environment and the economy and all that. That's all produced by this perception or misperception of extreme dysfunctional separateness. So know all those things and practice them every day and notice how they influence your life, especially if you're like, Larry Fink or Bloomberg or POTUS, as they say, President of the United States, or any world leader or corporate leader. The responsible thing to do is notice those things and how they're influencing your decisions. The whole law, corporate law, that you have to enhance shareholder value at the expense of all others is a trauma-based sociopathology, worldview way of looking at things. So the creation of a B Corp, considering all the other stakeholders, is a move in the early adolescent direction of more connection, awareness, and appreciation.
Yeah, I think there's a real movement towards that in business today.
Yeah, and that's all
let me just interrupt.
stages.
I got to just interrupt 1 second. I have another interview, so I don't know if he's going to not show up or whatever. But when they show up, they just kind of pop in here. So I'm just warning you, in the middle of our talking, we might get interrupted by somebody joining us. But I wanted to say. Well, one thing was I was just mentioning, and I cut you off, but one thing I was just mentioning about how I see over the last maybe 10 years, there's a movement even in business to be more socially responsible and more conscious about others and how what we do affects and integrates with the world at large. And you mentioned then that this is about the stages again.
Yep, and becoming aware of all the previous developmental stages and starting to appreciate each one and see the interconnection of all things. You can no longer treat people like separate objects that are there. So the thing is, once you get cognitive and visual, it's really easy to objectify things. And then it's one simple step from objectification to commodification. That, with metabolic efficiency, are the two real drivers of slavery. and why humans will enslave one another.
Interesting. So one thing that I was curious about was, we were talking about, changing from surviving to thriving.
Yeah.
And I certainly wholeheartedly agree with that and feel that definitely is a process that I have done and continue to do and try to stay in those things and get out of that survival mode.
Yeah.
When it comes to traumatic experiences that people have, seems like their go-to is the fight or flight response.
Yeah, one of the really useful books everybody should read, at least the first 20 pages, is called Complex PTSD, From Surviving to Thriving. Trauma experts essentially see that easily 85% of the population has suffered what's called complex PTSD. It's recurring shocks to the system that result in dysfunctional fight, flight, freeze, and fawning responses to stress. And in those first few pages, they give this great set of examples of the functional, really healthy fight, flight, freeze, and fawning reactions that we can choose. Fighting isn't just become Merriweather and beat the pulp out of somebody. Right. It's stand for a principle of truth that's valuable, valid, and important. Say, yes, this is important. We must speak for it. We must defend it. You can do that with great words and an energy of presence and commitment that is, the most admirable thing any of us could ask for.
That's great. Well, I'm going to close on that, and I'm going to definitely put some information in the show notes about you and about your work and about the books that we were talking about, and I'll be in touch soon.
All right, sounds great. And a website that we're going to have up soon is victoryforall.life.
I like it.
And there'll be lots of information about that, because that's one of the results you get out of all this. It's not just nerding out on developmental stages in consciousness. We actually get a life in a world where everybody gets to win. So victoryforall.life, because everybody from the frogs to us gets to win.
For more information and monthly topics of interest, please go to transformyourfuture.com and join our newsletter.